Ladies and gentlemen, David Chipperfield. Please join me in my cozy corner. You're looking very colorful today. You have a huge body of work, David, varying from cutlery to ceramics to shops to private homes to office buildings to museums. The shops are also certainly not the least. Vuitton, Driade, Valentino, Selfridges, and the museums, of course, are wonderful. The Neues Museum, Volkwang, the private museum Jumex. You just were recently commissioned for the Modern Art Wing of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Congratulations. And you're working on the Neues Nationalgalerie by Mies van der Rohe. I wondered, was it never an issue in Germany that such prominent heritage would be entrusted to someone who was not German?
No, I think the Germans, and especially in Berlin, have displayed an extraordinary openness to outsiders. As we saw in Christian Rapp's talk, Norman Foster did the Reichstag, and there's been others. It was the Neues Museum was an international competition, and we were lucky to be involved and lucky to win it. I think there is always an issue about being from outside, but I think also that can be an advantage in all contexts, not just in Germany. I think in all contexts.
There's an issue of trust involved there, and also now for the Nationalgalerie, you said that you can't do something like that without a client who is truly engaged and understands the considerations involved. You need to bring the building up to modern standards to give it new life. At the same time, you can't really change anything. How are you going to do that?
Well, I think that we've been fortunate in Berlin, and I think Neues Museum was an extraordinary and a unique project, not only for its content, but also for the way it was done and what it demanded of us. Such a project as Neues Museum, I'm going back from your question about National Gallery, because in a way the answer lies with the Neues Museum. It's impossible to do a project of that complexity with the ideas that we had without total engagement. Engagement with the client, the diverse bodies that come under the umbrella of being called the client, and the professional team, and also engagement with the city, with the citizens, with people of Berlin in that case. In theory, that's true of all architectural projects, but that engagement is often shortened or bypassed. In Neues Museum, it was certainly not shortened and bypassed. It was, if anything, prolonged and elaborated and fully exercised. But that engagement, which I believe all architectural projects benefit from, means that there's more than one group of people fighting for quality. In other words, the responsibilities of the project become shared. In many architectural projects, the architect is the one fighting a corner for certain things. The quality of the construction, the ideas behind the building. And you have to establish those in the face of other much more obvious pressures of time, of money, delivery issues.
Will it be that way in the Neues Nationalgalerie as well?
Well, what I think was possible in the Neues Museum and what has been possible in the planning process of National Gallery, and it will be the same, is that we are working with a group of people who participate and who are engaged in that process. That doesn't happen naturally. I think it's our responsibility to make that happen. But it is a theme of our work, of our office generally, and my particular concern that architecture is a societal issue, and yet increasingly architecture has become marginalized to become, in a way, the surface of things. It's become the design of the exterior of office buildings. It's become the design of the exterior of buildings. And the quality of our cities and the quality of architecture does not lie in surface. It lies in substance. And you can only get to substance if there is engagement and there's shared ideas, there is common ground.
I'll come to the Biennale in just one moment. You have spoken, well, may I even say harsh words about the difference in the attitude towards architecture and the public realm in Germany as opposed to the UK. 90% of your own work until the last 5 years has been outside the UK, and in several publications you've held the German attitude towards investing in the public realm up as an example that the UK should follow. What is it that causes that difference in approach, that difference in culture?
Because there's still an idea of a state in Germany. There's still an idea, and it's not all good. I mean, there are issues both ways, but to caricaturize the conditions, in England we have a very clear Anglo-Saxon market-driven economy, and architecture and our cities are part of that. So London is being formed not by any notion of society's idea about what shape it should be, but we've surrendered the shape of the city to the forces of the market, because the Anglo-Saxon mentality is that the market has intelligence and the market develops.
Is this the legacy of Thatcher?
Yes, of course, but that's also, it's an American, it's what happens in America. And unfortunately, in a way, or fortunately, one would have to say that that sort of released, slightly deregulated city has been very financially successful. So in other words, a loose regulation encourages development, development brings money, and therefore everyone says, well, this is successful. It depends what you measure success by. It depends whether you measure success by what you're left with, what the shape of the city is once you've finished, once that investment maybe runs out, or it depends, whether you're more concerned with the shape of the city. And I think that, this is a big problem for London. I think it's a big problem for all of our societies, where we've surrendered any notion of shape and form, and therefore the collective, to become the consequence of individual investments and actions. And unfortunately, that's at a time when scale is changing. I mean, it was interesting walking around Amsterdam yesterday and noticing how, because even that's quite different. The historical buildings here, every house is different, and you realize that the quality of the historic center is through the diversity of the buildings. And there are some moments where you can see that 4 or 5 buildings have been knocked down and one building's been put back in its place. The change of quality is not to do with a modern building or an old building, it's to do with the change of scale. So what's happening in London, for instance, it's not just that modern architecture is bad and historic architecture is good, for heaven's sake. It's the idea that things operate at a different scale. If you knock down 40 houses which have 40 front doors, or 40 buildings which have 40 front doors, you put one building back that has one front door. In that action, you've done a very substantial change to the nature of the city, whether or not the building is designed well, or badly.
Your theme for the Biennale in 2012 as curator was Common Ground. And in an interview about it, you said that it was intended as a provocation to your colleagues who are building too many singular buildings. I thought that was an interesting alternative to the iconic building. And that your colleagues in architecture are basically moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. You really took your colleagues to task. What were the reactions?
And I include ourselves in that. I mean, I was taking the profession to task. And the idea of common ground was to say that I wanted the Biennale to be a forum where the profession looked at what it shared, what architects shared in common, as opposed to promote...
In common with whom, David?
With each other. With each other, first of all. So
and?
what do we share as architects? Let me start again. That there is a danger in our world of consumption that architects are part of consumption and branding. In order to sell our products, we have to be identifiable, like everything else on the market is identifiable. In order to become identifiable, your brand has to become clear, and you have to determine yourself and identify yourself different to other brands. So there is a pressure on our profession not to show what our collective ideas are, but what to show our individual qualities might be versus yours or somebody else's. This exaggerates and only plays in to the issues that society has in the first place, insofar that we tend to gravitate towards comfort, towards the individual, and we seem to become less and less capable of creating collective representations, or representations of the collective. That seems to be really difficult to deliver. And yet, we still want it. It would be much easier if we said that we are now moving into a period where we all want individual comfort, and we're not that bothered to be part of anything else than our own individual comfort. It's not true. We seem to resist this. Even billionaires in their yachts park them all together in the same place. It's ridiculous. They spend their whole life earning enough money to have a huge yacht, and then they all park them a few meters from each other in the same bay in Capri. So it's just it's some sort of, re-congregation, but we do want to be part of. Life only makes sense if you're part of something. In architectural and urban terms, we seem to be less and less capable of giving form and representation to that. Partly because the state is no longer equipped or rich enough to do it, and secondly, in those societies that are clearly, and the Anglo-Saxon societies are there, clearly dependent on investment and the market does not choose to make those gestures unless it's to their benefit.
But even you, with this strong sense of conscience and responsibility of your profession, even you operate within this field. You need investors to get a building built. How do you deal with this dilemma in your own practice?
We just complain. We cry. No, this is why architecture is very difficult, because we are complicit. We have to, by nature, we are complicit. We need power, we need money. We cannot go home at night and make a building. So that's why I'm saying that architecture is a societal question. You can't just keep blaming architects for making bad architecture. You can't blame architects for our cities. And in Common Ground, what I tried to do was remind ourselves that, you know, we have a sort of societal ambition. I think if you ask 99% of architects, well, I think if you ask all, most architects believe that they do something, that their work, most architects want to contribute something beyond just their professional duty.
Yes.
They believe that they have the chance, they believe they do something good. And yet most people don't think that architects do anything good. So there's a mismatch.
They're down at the bottom somewhere along with journalists.
Absolutely. So until we can find common ground, not only amongst ourselves in terms of, you know, stop competing with each other in such a individualistic way, but also until we can find a better common ground with society, until we can find engagement, then we're just left decorating buildings. And I think that's the critical issue. And there are moments, and that's why Noise Museum, and why our cultural, it's much easier on cultural projects, because on cultural projects, the client, you know, if you're designing, if you're making a museum, most of the people involved in that do per se have societal ambitions. The museum has ambitions towards the public, and therefore that's the very reason it's there. The board of trustees on a museum are normally quite civilized and sophisticated and understand that time and money, you know, is only two parts of the triangle.
Perhaps that's the insidious part of our system. We all intend well and want the best, but the system has pushed us into this investment
well, it also means
whirlwind.
that we are in a society which is interested in leveraging value. So if you think about design after the war, design of furniture or products was about producing, you know, a designer's ambition would be to produce the best quality object for the lowest price for the most people. Design now is to give more value, to give more price to a product. So you basically leveraging a bottle of water from its raw cost to its market value. That's what design is for. It's about taking a pair of trainers and by designing us and making us desirous of it, that we can then charge more. So you've seen in 50 years a flip from the role of designer as something, someone that had societal status to something which is giving leverage. And that's what we're doing as architects. We are basically trying to leverage value on construction, which is fine, except no one was going to do that on schools or housing for, you know, social housing. There's no leverage to be made on social housing. You can't build low-cost housing and get any more money out of it. You can build expensive housing for rich people, and you can add 30% on it. You can build office buildings, and you can add 30% by the quality design. But you can't leverage a school.
Yeah. So there's very little incentive to invest in that.
There's little incentive, and there's little incentive to engage good architecture and good design, except when the state demands it.
As in Germany.
And when we demand it, by the way, when we insist on it. I mean, in England, we've recently had a minister of education who publicly said, we do not want to waste money on architects anymore. We do not. He even said, we do not need to make architects like Richard Rogers richer. Wow. And so it was a public declaration that architecture doesn't bring anything except fees for the architect. And in order to, rubbing salt into that wound, they even proposed reducing spatial standards so that corridors in schools should only be 1.2 meters wide. Even the teachers at this point, with no architectural axe to grind, said corridors are where we meet our kids. So you realize that as soon as delivery, balancing books and value for money, these become, the project management mentality is not balanced by anything else, then, we are a bit lost.
When we met in London previous to this conversation, you told me that you'd heard a rumor that the renovation of the Houses of Parliament in London were probably going to cost about £3 billion.
A billion, I think.
1 billion. A lot of money already. And that someone had said, well, why don't we just make them into apartments? Is this the newest wave of barbarism rushing over London?
There were two subjects which were conveniently wrapped into one. It has been demonstrated that the restoration, the House of Parliament are in a very bad condition. They haven't been repaired properly, and there may well be £1 billion worth of restoration work to do over the next 10 years. Clearly that allowed people to question whether we have a government that deserves £1 billion spent on where it sits. But also, it was even put into the idea that, like many other things, these are irrelevant, infrastructures that should be replaced. Now, in one sense, you could say, if there was a new idea of government, maybe there should be a new idea of the seat of government. But what was slightly shocking was that in this sort of Anglo-Saxon, everything has a price, it was a discussion that, should it not be sold off? Which struck me as being very, very unromantic and very...
Well, Philistine. Oh, no, wait. I'm interviewing you, not the other way around. I shouldn't put words in your mouth. Unfortunately, we almost have to wrap up. I have one more, fundamental question. In the jury report of the Sikkens Prize, they praise the meticulous and respectful way in which you incorporate historic and environmental elements of context into your design. Context and continuity are words that we come across in writing about you frequently. At the same time, The Guardian calls you an unapologetic modernism. And I'm interested in that, in the relationship between modernism and context, preservation, building into a historic setting, because, of course, through the years, the relationship between modernism and the past has been strained, to say the least.
Just backpedaling a bit, I came out of architecture school in the late 70s, early 80s, and modern architecture was hated, not only by Prince Charles, but generally it was quite hated. Modernism had run out of energy, and modern architecture was in a very bad way. It was very strange to come into the professional market, as it were, having trained for the best part of 10 years, to discover that nobody really wants you. And it was a sort of shock to discover that architecture was so hated. I've found, what I've been interested in all my professional life is to try to address that. And part of people's dislike of architecture is the fact that they are disengaged from the process in the ways that we talked about before. Part of it is visual and aesthetic, and it's used too much. It's about aesthetics, but I think it's partly because buildings don't offer a way of participating. So I think that I think that was something that Noise Museum was very good at, in a sense. I mean, it's an extreme and rather strange project in one way, but I think it allowed us to demonstrate sort of ideas of engagement, which were not just about fitting in, they were, active ideas about, context. Context not just physical, but political and social. Wrapping
up, last question. which is a leading question, let me warn you. So far as I know, you've only built one project in the Netherlands. That's a combination of shops and apartments in the town of Almere.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I was trying to remember what it was. Yeah.
You built too much. Is there anything coming up next?
I don't think so, no. No, I don't think so. I thought you were going to ask me about colour.
I thought I'd
It's a sort of elephant in the room.
cover that subject by joking about your colorful outfit. Yeah.
No, but I think it is interesting about, I mean, I am, of course, honoured to get this prize, and it is something we've been talking about today, is about, you know, the role of colour in our work and where it is, and everyone's been very generous at saying it, you know, it's somehow colour is embedded in our work. But actually earlier on we had a very interesting conversation about that one realizes that colour is also a place of personalization, and it's very endearing how people, you know, use colour to personalize things. And I think that's something which we realize, that architecture has suffered from that lack of personalization. We don't think, you know, in the favelas people paint their own buildings. We can't paint our own buildings anymore. It's quite interesting how color is, and paint, I mean, just talking about paint, is a way of personalizing that we do to our front doors occasionally, but not much more. But I promise to use more color in the future.